35 years ago, when I was a bacher in Yeshiva, I was learning Maseches Nedarim and Treyasar, the Navi Treyasar at the same time. And I had a har. There's a Mishnah Maseches Nedarim with Daf Vav, which says the following: if a person makes a neder that I'm not going to go into your house, and you sell the house to somebody else, it's mutter. Because the neder was, I won't go into your house. But if a person makes a neder, I'm not going to go into this house, and you sell the house to somebody else, then it's usher. It's still the same house. The Ram and Daf Zayin brings from Yerushalmi that if a person has a house, and the house collapses, and the person rebuilds the house, the halacha is fakert. If I say, I'm not going to go into your house, and chas v'shalom, your house collapses, and you rebuild it, it's your house. It's awesome. But if I make a neder, I'm not going to go into this house, and the house collapses and you rebuild it, it's not the same house. It's a different house. So it's fakir, the exact opposite. In other words, if you sell the house to somebody else, then the halacha is that bayizeh is aser and beischa is mutter. But if the house collapses and is rebuilt, then it's the exact opposite. That beischa is aser and bayizeh is mutter. In other words, the Ram says in Yesod that if a person has a house and the house collapses and the person rebuilds the house, and the Ram says beferish, even if it's kimidoso, it's the same size, the same shape, everything is identically the same, it's not the same house, it's a different house. That's what the Ram says in Maseches Nedarim. At the same time, I was learning Treyasar. And in the second parak of Chagai, the Ribono Shel Olam, actually the first parak of Chagai, he gives instructions to the Yidden, and he says, Hashem says, Aluva hahar, go to the mountain, v'havei some eitz, and bring lumber, ubnu haboyas, and build the Beis HaMikdash. Chagai was one of the Nevi'im who was Menabe at the end of the Golus Bavo. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the command to build the Beis HaMikdash. Ve'eretz abo v'ikavda, and I will desire it, and I will be honored therein. Amar Hashem. So says Hashem. And of course, we all know the famous Gemara in Yuma, that it says, ve'ekavda, I will be honored therein, but the word ekavda is written without a hay. It's missing the final hay. And therefore, this is a remes to the 5 things that were missing in the Bayesheni. The Bayesheni was missing, number 1, Ora in Kapiris Kruvim. That wasn't present in the Bayesheni. And it was missing Eish, the fire of the Mizbeach wasn't the same. And it was missing Shechina, the divine presence wasn't the same. And it was missing Ruach HaKodesh. There was no longer Nevuah at the time of the Bayesheni. And it was missing the Urim V'Tumim. So these were the 5 things that were missing. That's why the word Ve'ekavda is written missing a hay. Hashem will be honored therein, but there'll be something missing. In Parak Beis, the Navi responds to the fact that people who witnessed the rebuilding of the Bayesheni were very dejected. Because by comparison to the Bayis Rishon, it seemed very, very much diminished. So it says in the pasuk, Mi vachem hanishar, who is here from those that remain from the pre-Golus period? Asher ra es habayis hazeh, who saw this house b'chvayde harishon, in its original glory. Umatem royim osoata, now you see it, halo kamohu ka'ayim beinechem. It's like nothing in your eyes. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them a consolation that it's true that the Bayesheni is diminished by comparison to the Bayis Rishon, but there'll be a third Beis HaMikdash, and about that it could be said that Godol Yiyeh K'vayid HaBayis Hazeh HaAchron Min HaRishon. That the final Beis HaMikdash, the third Beis HaMikdash, will even be greater than the first. So don't be too disappointed. This is only temporary. The third Beis HaMikdash will be even greater. But it says that when the Navi was speaking to them, it says, who among you saw Es HaBayis Hazeh, who saw this house, B'chvaydei Harishon, in its original glory? So what do you mean, this house? They're looking at the Bayis Sheni, and they say, who saw this house, B'chvaydei Harishon, in its original glory? So Mitzuda says, Ulefi shehaya ba'isei makam atzmai, since the second Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt in the same place, Karo HaBayis Hazeh, it's called this house. So my kasha was that the Ran Nedarim says not that way. The Ran Nedarim says if a house collapses and we rebuild it even in the same place, it's not the same house. If a person makes a neder, I'm not going to be nena from Bayis Zeh, from this house. You can be nena from the rebuilt house. And here Mitzudas explains Pshat in the Pasuk that people are looking at the Bayis Sheni, and a reference is being made to the Bayis Rishon, and it's called the Bayis Hazeh. It's called this Bayis. This was the kasha I had 35 years ago. B'mikra, I was learning Nedarim and Shvei Yasser at the same time, so I had this kasha. Now the teretz is pashut, but it's a very important thing to know. When we talk about change, the question always is, when is it the same thing but changed, and when is something a new thing? Now this is pashut, that to say that two things are really the same but there was a change, there has to be something which remains constant. Against that foundation, which remains consistent, there is a change which takes place. So for example, if I have a piece of furniture and it was painted brown and now I painted green, because the piece of furniture is a constant, it is the same shape, the same size, the same material, there's a change which takes place against that background. So before it was painted brown, now it's painted green. So there we would say it's the same chair, just there was a change. But if I would take that chair and grind it into sawdust and then make a different chair out of it, so you couldn't say it's the same chair, just that it changed. There's nothing left of the original chair, and therefore it's clearly I made something new. That's pashut. To say that something is the same but it changed, meaning there has to be something which is constant over time, and the change takes place against that background. When we talk about a davar gashmi, a physical thing, like a conventional house, so if the house collapses and you rebuild it, it's not the same house as the Ran. Now I know in Toronto some people like to get away with this, because apparently there are some regulations that pertain to rebuilding houses. Is it a new house? Is it the old house? So somehow if you tear down leave a little bit, you can argue it's the same house. I don't know if the Ran would agree with that. But the Ran is saying if a house collapses and you rebuild the house, it's a davar gashmi. If the thing breaks down to its most fundamental components and you rebuild it, it's a different thing. But if you talk about a davar ruchni, you talk about a spiritual thing, what the Beis HaMikdash is more than its four walls. There's a spiritual quality that it has, and that remains constant. As we know, for example, the Rambam paskins, it's machlokes in the Gemara, whether makriv and afal pi she'ein bayis, can you bring korbanos on the makam hamikdash when the place is destroyed? Whereas during the Galus bubble, in theory, could they have brought korbanos? Or bizman hazeh, after the korban bayis sheni, in theory, could we bring korbanos? So it's a machlokes tanoim, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. One man, the Amar, says makriv and afal pi she'ein bayis, that you could bring korbanos even though the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. Because Kedusha Yishayna Kitchel Shaita, the Kitchel Blavo. The Kedusha which was established with the Binyan Bayis Rishon is everlasting. So even during the Golos Bavel, and even after the Churban Bayis Sheni, you can bring korbanos. The other Rambam argues and says no, that Kedusha Rishayna Kitchel Shaita V'lo Kitchel Blavo, and therefore they couldn't bring korbanos in the Makam HaMikdash until the second base of Mikdash was rebuilt, and we weiter can't bring korbanos until the third base of Mikdash will be rebuilt. There's Machlekes Rishonim how to paskin. The sheet of the Rambam in Hilchos Beis HaBechira is Makriv Nafal Pishein Bayis. And the Ravid argues. The Ravid says that we paskin the other way, that you can't bring korbanos b'zman hazeh. And we mentioned many years ago that Rabbi David Karliner in the Sheilas David says that on this machlokes there's no hachura, there is no psak, and therefore l'maisa, that's why we don't bring korbanos b'zman hazeh. But al kapanim, the sheet of the Rambam certainly is this way, that the kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, which allows us to bring korbanos, is a davar nitzchi, it's a davar which is eternal. So why do we have to build a Beis HaMikdash? There's a mitzvah of Asali Mikdash. There's a mitzvah that the place where we bring korbanos should be built with a structure, with a heichal, with a kodesh hakadoshim. So even though there is something which lasts from the Bayis Rishon, but there still is a mitzvah to have a Beis HaMikdash. That's why they built the Bayis Sheni. That's why we'll build the Bayis Shlishi. But there is something which is constant. Since there is something which is constant, so it could be the walls change. So first we had Shlomo Melech's walls. Then we had the walls of the Bava. We know from Chazal, the Gemara Bava Basra, that even the Bayis Sheni underwent change. Hurdus totally renovated the Beis HaMikdash. We don't say that there were 3 Batei Mikdash. It was the same second Beis HaMikdash, just had an extensive renovation. But the reason it's considered a change and not a new house is because the essence of what the Beis HaMikdash is its ruchnius, its spiritual constant. So the walls changed against that background. The spiritual aspect of the Beis HaMikdash is a constant, is a given. If the walls sometimes are this way, and sometimes are this way, sometimes are this way, that means it's this house which changed. And that's why by Chagai it says that when they were looking at the Bayis Sheni and speaking about the Bayis Rishon, they could still call it Bayis Zeh, this house. It was the same house. The walls were one way before, they're one way now. But by a house in Toronto, which is essentially a Dover Gashmi, it's a material thing, you tear down the house and rebuild the house. It's not the same house, it's a different house. There's nothing which remains constant. It's a different house, and therefore, Lagabi Nidarim, if a person makes a neder not to go into this house, it's not the same house, it's a different house. What I'd like to talk about tonight is this idea, that which is constant, that which remains in the Beis HaMikdash, even B'zman Hazeh. I mentioned this very interesting thing, that the last righteous king before the Churban Bayis Rishon was Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu was a tremendous tzaddik, and he was the force behind the great movement for tshuva, and he was killed in a battle against Paro Necho, the king of Egypt. And it says in the pasuk that Vayekainen Yirmiyahu Yoshiyahu, that Yirmiyahu lamented over Yoshiyahu, and it says Vayitnum l'chayk al Yisrael, that it was established as a chayk, it was established as a law for the Jewish people. V'hinam ksuvim ala kinais, and the lamentations which Yirmiyah said over Yoshiyahu are written along with the other kinais. So Rashi explains that the chayk was that whenever Klal Yisrael would gather to lament the tsaras that befall us, we are obligated to make reference to Yoshiyahu. That whatever it is we're lamenting, whether it's the Churban Beis HaMikdash or the tsaras that occur over the Deiros, Every time the Jews gather to lament, we have to lament Yoshio. And when it says that Hinam Ksuvim ala Kinais, that Yirmiyahu's lamentations are written along with the other Kinais, that's because Chazal have a Kabbalah. But the fourth parak of Eicha Yuam Zahav, really is the Hina that Yirmiyah said over Yoshio. And it was incorporated into the Sefer Kinais. That's Hinam Ksuvim ala Kinais. Therefore, when we say Eicha, we're of course making reference to Yoshio. But we know that in the Kinais we say on Tisha B'Av, there's also a Kina about Yoshio. Eicha Eli Kananu Me'elov. And there's a Kina which talks about Yoshio. So what do we know about Yoshio? It's a very interesting thing. Yoshio was a very big tzaddik, even though his father was a tremendous Rosh. And it says that when he was 8 years old, he became king, and he began to seek Ribono Shel Olam, and he sponsored a massive renovation of the Beis HaMikdash. And in the process of the renovations, a Sefer Torah was found. And of course, according to Chazal, what was special about this Sefer Torah was not that it was a Sefer Torah, of course, Yoshia would have seen a Sefer Torah, but it was the Sefer Torah of the Beis HaMikdash, which normally was rolled to Bereshis, and in this case it was rolled to the Teichach of Dvarim, which was a very, very shocking, very frightening thing. And they sent a message to Huldah HaNaviah, who was actually a relative of Yirmiyah, to find out the interpretation. And Huldah HaNaviah sent back a message like this. Kayam Hashem, Hineni Mevi Ra Ala Makom Hazeh V'Al Yoshvav. I'm going to bring calamity on this place and on its inhabitants. Es Kol Ha'olais Haksuvas Al Sefer, all the curses that are written in the Sefer Torah, Asher Karu Lifnei Melech Yehuda. The Teichach will come true. And this, of course, is Tachas Asher Azavuni, because they abandoned me. V'yikachu Lelehim Acherim, and they offered incense to other gods. L'man Hachiseini, to anger me b'chol Ma'aseh Yedayim. V'titach Hamosi b'makom hazeh, I will pour out my wrath in this place, Lo Tichbe, it won't be extinguished. But Huldah said, send a message to the king that because you humbled yourself before me and you tore your clothes when you heard the frightening words, so you will die in peace. You will not see any of the terrible things that will happen in this place in your lifetime. That was the message that was sent back to Yoshio. And at that point, Yoshio could have said, okay, Shalom Yili, I'm all right. I don't have to worry what's going to happen after I die. But at that point, Yoshio began a campaign to eradicate Avodah Zarah from Eretz Yisrael. And both in Malachim and in Divrei Hayamim, there's a tremendous description of everything that he did and how he battled to eradicate the Avodah Zarah. And from the Psukim Kipshuto, it seems that he was very successful. That he was able to usher in an era of righteousness and genuine tshuva. And then something happened. And this is not described in great detail in Malachim, but in Divrei Hayamim it's described that Paro Nechai, the king of Mitzrayim, was traveling to wage war against Karkemish, who was the king of Ashur. Now, Eretz Yisrael is kind of in between. Mitzrayim is to the southwest, and Ashur is to the northeast. So the route that you would take to travel from Mitzrayim to Ashur goes through Eretz Yisrael. And so the Egyptian army is marching through Eretz Yisrael. So Yoshio assumes they're coming to wage war in Eretz Yisrael. So Yoshio gathers his army to stop Mitzrayim in its tracks. The king of Mitzrayim sends a message, and he says, Mali v'lach melech Yehuda. So we have nothing to do with each other. Lo alecha ato hayoim. I am not coming to fight you. Ki el beis milchamti. I'm only going to fight against my enemy, Ashur. Let me just pass through. And the Gemara in Taina says that he made a mistake. Yoshio. He wasn't Nimlach b'Yirmiyahu. He should have consulted Yirmiyahu Hanavi. And he darshan the pasuk. It says in the brachas, "V'cherev lo yisavar ba'aretzechem," that a sword will not pass through your land. And Chazal understand that means even cherev shel shalom, that when Klal Yisrael is doing the right thing, there's a haftacha that even a peaceful army will not march through your land. And therefore, Yoshio understood that he was meant to stop Mitzrayim. The Gemara says that he made a mistake. And this is a mistake that certainly Yirmiyahu would have corrected, because, in fact, his generation was not doing the right thing. His generation, himself was a tzaddik, Yoshiyahu, but his generation was not righteous. And therefore, this haftacha, the cherev lo savar ba'aretzechem, didn't apply. And in this battle, Yoshiyahu was tragically killed. So the Mefarshim are bothered. If you look in the Psukim, it seems the generation was righteous. He was an after them, but Tshuva, they stopped doing Avodah Zarah. So the Medrash in Eicha, Medrash Rabbi in Eicha says that the people were still being Oived Avodah Zarah in secret. And the Medrash describes an amazing thing. It says that the people, they used to have double doors in their houses. Like here you have two doors side by side. And the tzura of the Avodah Zarah was painted on the back of the door in such a way that it was only formed when the two doors were closed. When the doors were opened, so the tzura disappeared. So it says that Yoshiyahu sent Talmidei Chachamim, pairs of Talmidei Chachamim, to make a house-to-house search for the Avodah Zarah. So they came to the house and they opened the doors. They looked around. There's no Avodah Zarah. And even if they would have looked at the backs of the doors, they wouldn't have detected no Avodah Zarah. And it could be that the backs of the doors they didn't look at. You know, when you break into a house and you bang the doors open, you don't look what's behind the doors. Anyway, when they were leaving, so the people of the house would say, "Would you mind closing the door on your way out?" And they would close the doors. And they would form the surah of the Avodah Zarah. So it says in the Medrash that the people said that these people came to be misakein, they came to correct. They're the ones who were makalkal. They actually formed the surah of the Avodah Zarah. This was an amazing thing. In the Kina that we say on Tisha B'Av about Yoshiyahu, it says, Davak bai chet leitzanei hadar, asher kamu achar hadelas lizdar. That the sin of the leitzanei hadar, the scoffers of the generation, stuck to them because they arranged the Avodah Zarah behind the doors. That's a reference to this medrash. They're called leitzanei hadar because it was a big joke, right? They told them, "Would you mind closing the doors?" So that these Talmidei Chachamim, they should be the ones who would form the tzura of the Avodah Zarah. So they were leitzanei hadar. And this sin stuck to Yoshiyahu. Davak b'chet leitzanei hadar, asher kamu achar hadelas lizdar. In other words, because Yoshiyahu fooled himself. Yoshiyahu genuinely convinced himself that he eradicated Avodah Zarah and that the generation was righteous, and therefore the haftacha of the cherev lo savar ba'aretzechem was applicable in his generation, and therefore he would be successful in stopping Paro Nochai. But he was mistaken. So it was the chet of Leitzanei Hadar that stuck to him, and that was his downfall. That was his downfall. And Yirmiyahu lamented his death. It comes out a very strange thing. It comes out, it's tragic. Maybe if Yoshiyahu would have lived longer, maybe he could have accomplished more. It's possible. That's conjecture. But Lemaisa, it seems that Yoshiyahu accomplished nothing. There's the mass tshuva was only an illusion. The generation was still practicing Avodah Zarah in secret. The gzeira of the Churban was not averted. So why is it that we lament the death of Yoshiyahu to the extent that we do? That every Tisha B'Av, it's a chayk, the pasuk says, "Vayitnum l'chayk al Yisrael," that we have to lament the death of Yoshiyahu. Are we lamenting the loss of someone who accomplished something? Or are we lamenting the fact that something could have been, if only he wasn't killed prematurely? I'd like to point out that there's something very, very interesting about Yoshiyahu that we don't often think about. It says that after Yoshiyahu successfully, or seemingly successfully, eradicated Avodah Zarah, it was Pesach time. So it says, "Vayas Yoshiyahu b'Yerushalayim Pesach l'Hashem." He held the Korban Pesach, and it was brought. And that day, the day of the Shchitas Korban Pesach, he called the Leviim, and he told them, "Tinu es Aron HaKodesh b'bayis asher bana Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael." Place the Aron Kodesh in the house that Shlomo HaMelech built. And then he told them to go on and slaughter the Korban Pesach. So on the day of the Shchitas Korban Pesach, Yoshiyahu told Leviim to put the Aron in the house that Shlomo HaMelech built. So what does this refer to? So the Rishonim on the spot say the Pshuto Shel Mikra means put the Aron back into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Well, what happened to it? Why wasn't it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? So the conjecture is that it was removed by the wicked kings that came before, Menashe, Omoin, etc., because they put idols into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So Mistama, they removed the Aron. So now Yoshiyahu eradicated the Avodah Zarah, cleansed the Mikdash. He told them to put the Aron back. But Chazal, the Gemara in Yuma, Nafnun Gimel, this is a different shot. That this command to the Leviim was to be gainez the Aron, was to conceal the Aron, to hide the Aron. To hide the Aron. Because Yoshiyahu knew that the Churban was coming. He knew the Churban was imminent, which is an amazing thing. That means that even he knew that all that he accomplished would not prevent the Churban. And therefore he took the precaution of being gainez the Aron, that it should be hidden away. Now it's not beferish in the Bavli, but in Yerushalmi and Shkalim, it says that Yoshiyahu told the Leviim, because if the Aron will be taken to Bavel, it'll never come back. And this is what he said. I know that it'll never be brought back. So therefore, we have to take the precaution of being gainez the Aron, bury the Aron, and this way, even if it'll be a Churban, we'll have the Aron. The question is, what does it mean, put it in the house that Shlomo HaMelech built? What does that mean? So he told them, take the Aron and put it in the house that Shlomo HaMelech built. So what is the house that Shlomo HaMelech built? So there's an amazing Rambam. And no one knows if the Rambam had a source to this or not. But the Rambam in Perek Dalet, Mehilchas Beis HaBechira, says an amazing thing. He writes, Ube'ez shebana Shlomo es habayis. When Shlomo built the Beis HaMikdash, the Yodash lesofa lecharev, and he knew that it would be destroyed, which is an amazing thing. Now that Yoshiyahu knew, okay, he had the Nevuah of Chulda. He thought that perhaps the tshuva would be mevatel the gzeira. So, Kam Chazal and say, no, even he knew the tshuva wouldn't be mevatel the gzeira. But Shlomo Melech also knew that it would be charav, says the Rambam. So, Bana Makayim Lignais by Ha'aron Lamata. He built a place to conceal the Aron below, a subterranean place. Matmonios, Akumos, Valkalkalais, catacombs, tunnels under the Makom HaMikdash. Shlomo HaMelech prepared a place to hide the Aron. V'Yoshiyahu hamelech tziva v'gonzoi b'makom shubana shlomo. And Yoshiyahu gave the command to the Leviim to hide the Aron in the place that Shlomo Melech prepared. Shneimar, and he brings the pasuk, Tenu es Aron HaKodesh, b'bayis asher bana Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael. That's the meaning of the pasuk. We put the Aron in the place that Shlomo Melech built. It's a reference to this concealed catacomb that Shlomo Melech built under the base of Mikdash to hide the Aron. That's what the Rambam says. But Shlomo Melech also knew that the base of Mikdash should be destroyed. There's a remez. There's a pasuk in Mishlei, right, which says that if the Yetzer Hara pleads with you, it says, don't listen to him. Ki sheva to'evais b'libai, because he has 7 abominations in his heart. So what does it mean he has 7 abominations in his heart? So the Yalkut says that it's a reference to the 7 sanctuaries that were destroyed. The Mishkan of the Midbar, Gilgal, Shilai, Noiv, Givain, and the first 2 Batei Mikdash. So the Yalkut says that Shlomo HaMelech, when he wrote Mishlei, already knew that there would be 7 Churbanos. Tisheva to'evais b'libai, because the Yetzer Hara has 7 abominations in his heart. So there's a riot in the Medrash that Shlomo HaMelech knew. Says the Rambam, that's why Shlomo HaMelech took the precaution, and he built this special place, and that's what Yoshiyahu HaMelech used. So the question is this. This is of great historical interest. But the Rambam is a Mishnah Torah, the Sefer Halacha. So why does he tell me this? It's also interesting to know, there really is a machlokas in the Gemara. If you look in the Gemara in Yom and after Gimel, there's another opinion, which says that the Aron was taken to Bavel. So the Rambam is l'chara coming to Paskin, that we go with the Shita that the Aron was nignaz b'mekaymai, that the Aron was buried under the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So is there an afkamina in halacha on this detail? So in the new Rambam, in the Frankel Rambam, in the section of the Sefer Halikutim, there is a chidush from the Yavitz. And the Yavitz writes that the Rambam who paskin, remember we mentioned there's a machlokas Rambam and the Ravid, whether the kedusha of the Migdash is everlasting, makriv and afal pish ein bias, or did the kedusha lapse with the churban? The Rambam held that it is totally in this shaila of what happened to the Aron. In other words, if you hold that the Aron was nignaz mekaymai, the Aron was buried there, so since the Aron remains, that's why the kedusha of the Mikdash is everlasting. So even though there was a churban, but since the Aron is buried there, so the kedusha of the Mikdash remains, and makriv and afal pishain bias. As we explained, that therefore even the second base of Mikdash is still called bayezeh with the first base of Mikdash. If you hold like the Mon Apr that the Aron was taken to Bavel, then with the churban, the kedusha of the Mikdash lapses, and that's the sheet of the Ravid. So the Ravid says the reason the Rambam tells me this whole story is not just because he's interested in telling me history. He's telling me something which is a psak. Because we paskin that this story took place, that Yoshiyahu was going as the Aron Mekaymai, that's why the kedusha of the Mikdash is nitzchi, and that's why makriv not b'shem bias. So this has a bearing lahalacha. There comes an amazing thing. We pointed out a few minutes ago, it seems that what did Yoshiyahu accomplish? Everything was futile. It was self-delusion. He fooled himself. He thought that he was machzor the Betshuva. He made a mistake. You see, he was killed as a consequence. The gzeir of the churban wasn't diverted. So why do we lament the death of Yoshiyahu? The truth is the exact opposite. Because Yoshiyahu accomplished something for nitzchias, for eternity. In other words, it's true that the tshuva that Yoshio was able to bring about was not enough to avert the gzeira of the Churban, but it was enough to allow that the Arayin should be nignaz, that there should be something eternal which is always there in the Makom HaMikdash. That the Churban that would come would not be an absolute Churban that would wipe everything out. It would only be a Churban of the physical Mikdash, but the spiritual Teichen, the spiritual content of the Mikdash would remain intact. That's what Yoshio was able to be payal, what he was able to accomplish with the tshuva that he brought Klal Yisrael to. In other words, if not for Yoshio, and you see from the whole story, that Yoshio only told the Leviim to be going as the Aron when? After the tshuva, after the Karban Pesach. What's the idea? The idea is Pashut. In other words, just because you hide something doesn't mean it can't be found. If not for the tshuva of Klal Yisrael, when the people of Babel destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, they would have destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and they would have dug deep, and they would have found the Aron, and they would have taken it. But just because you bury something, no one's going to find it. The reason that the Aron couldn't be nignaz successfully is only because of the tshuva of Klal Yisrael. So it's true that it wasn't enough to avert the Churban. There'd be a Churban. But the Churban that was not a Churban of the spiritual Teichen of the Beis HaMikdash. It was only a Churban of the physical walls. But the spiritual Teichen remained, and this is bearing the halacha, not even after B'Shem bias. And furthermore, that even the Bayis Sheni really is still Bayis Zeh with the Bayis Rishon. And I don't go into it at length, but you may remember years ago we spoke about a famous kasha, that the Gemara in Sanhedrin seems to say that Minui Melech, appointing a king, is a precondition to the building of the Beis HaMikdash. It has to be a Melech. And the Rabbi Kalina asks the question, so if so, how did they build the Bayis Sheni? There was no Melech at the time of the Bayis Sheni. So Rabbi Kalina contemplates perhaps Ezra satisfied the requirement of Melech. So at first glance it seems hard to understand, he certainly wasn't the Melech. But the answer is, it's true, you need a Melech to build the Beis HaMikdash. But the Beis HaMikdash wasn't destroyed. It's Bayis Zeh. It's the same house. It's the same house. Why wasn't it destroyed? It wasn't destroyed because the Aron was nignaz. In other words, if the Aron would have been taken, then the second Beis HaMikdash could not have been built. Because if you have to build the Beis HaMikdash from scratch, you need a melech. Right? But because the Aron was nignaz, makriv not b'shem bias, means the bias was not destroyed. The walls were destroyed. But the bias is still there. Therefore, the Bayis Sheni can be built even without a melech. And there are other nafkaminas, l'halach. Well, it was an amazing thing that it says in the pasuk that this Karban Pesach that Yoshio brought, the Novi is Meshabeach. It says that there was no Karban Pesach that was brought. It says Lo Nasa Pesach Kamo BeYisrael B'mei Shmuel Hanavi. There was no Karban Pesach like this Pesach of Yoshio from the time of Shmuel Hanavi. This was an amazing Karban Pesach. So all the kings of Israel never made such a Karban Pesach. So what was so outstanding about this Karban Pesach? So the Meshech Chachma says in Parshas Ba'aloischa an amazing, amazing thing. It's like this. There's a Taisvis in Kedushin, the Flamet Zayin, which is like this. The Gemara says, if you look in the Sefer Bamidbar, the parashas are out of order. The beginning of Sefer Bamidbar begins in Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And in Parshas Ba'aloischa, we have the bringing of the Karban Pesach, which is in Chodesh Nisan. So it's out of order. So the Gemara says a very funny thing. The Gemara says that the Torah rearranged the parashas. It didn't want to begin with the bringing of the Karban Pesach, because it's a very shameful thing. It's an embarrassing thing. That all the years in the Midbar, they only brought this one Karban Pesach. They were in the Midbar 40 years, they only brought this one Karban Pesach on the first anniversary of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. After they didn't bring Karban Pesach. Sosa says, why? So it's like this. If you look in Parshas Bo, it says that they brought the Karban Pesach in Mitzrayim, and Hashem says, "V'hoya ki yaviacha." When you come into Eretz Yisrael, you'll bring Karban Pesach. Now, of course, we know that it was meant to be by the next year they'd be in Eretz Yisrael. Why weren't they the next year in Eretz Yisrael? It's a tremendous embarrassment. It's a consequence of the Chet HaMeraglim. But the Maisa that there wasn't a Karban Pesach, because the Torah only gave the mitzvah of Karban Pesach in Eretz Yisrael. So why did they bring that one in the Midbar? Tosha says that was a hirasha, that was a special exception. It wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be that to be a Karban Pesach not in Eretz Yisrael. So when it turned out that because of the Chet HaEgel, the building of the Mishkan was delayed, and they ended up being in the Midbar for Nisan, there was a hirasha. But when it was further delayed by the Chet HaMeraglim, there was no hirasha, and therefore the rest of the 40 years they didn't bring the Karban Pesach. Tosfos there says an amazing thing. Tosfos says that the Karban Pesach, which is discussed in the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, also was a hirasha. Because Tosfos says that really anything which applies in Eretz Yisrael normally applies only after the Yud Daled Shana Shel Kibush V'Chiluk. After the 14 years, the 7 years of conquest and the 7 years of subdivision. So that Karban Pesach was also only a hirasha. They didn't bring Karban Pesach Kiseder year after year until 14 years after they came into Eretz Yisrael. So there were two exceptional Karbanos Pesach. There was the one exceptional Karban Pesach, the first anniversary of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, and there was another exceptional Karban Pesach right after they crossed the Yarden into Eretz Yisrael, and then they didn't bring it until after the subdivision of Eretz Yisrael, as the Torah says, "Vayaki Yaviacha." So the Meshech Chachma says, why did they bring these two special Karbanos Pesach? In other words, if Karban Pesach was meant to be brought only in Eretz Yisrael, and even in Eretz Yisrael only after the Yadal Shana Shel Kibush V'Chiluk, so why were these two exceptions made? The Karban Pesach of the first year and the Karban Pesach of Yoshua. So the Meshech Chachma says an amazing thing, that we know that one of the aspects of Karban Pesach is that it's the rejection of Avodah Zarah. Mishchu k'chul lechem tzoyin, right? Mishchu yideichem min Avodah Zarah. If you want to reject Avodah Zarah, that's what Karban Pesach symbolizes. So we know that there were various times in Jewish history where Jews succumbed to Avodah Zarah. First was the Chet HaEgel. So in order to be mevatel, to reject the Egel, they had to bring a Karban Pesach the next Nisan. That first Karban Pesach in the Midbar, that was the rejection of the Egel. And then at the end of the 40 years, we know the Jews succumbed to the Avodah Zarah of Baal Peor. So the next Pesach, which was that first Pesach in Eretz Yisrael, that Karban Pesach was to reject Baal Peor. After that, there wasn't a need for another Karban Pesach till after the Kibush V'Chiluk. But the Karban Pesach is to reject Avodah Zarah. So he says, and that's over here by Yoshiyahu. This Karban Pesach of Yoshiyahu, what does it mean there was no Karban Pesach like it? Because that's exactly what Yoshiyahu was doing. Yoshiyahu was working and toiling to eradicate Avodah Zarah. So what was the siyum, so to speak? What was the completion of the process? Was this Karban Pesach. And that's why it says there was no Karban Pesach for generations like this. Because it could be that throughout the era of the Malachim, there was Avodah Zarah and Karban Pesach. But the Karban Pesach wasn't the siyum, so to speak, of the eradication of Avodah Zarah. But with the campaign of Yoshio, destroy Avodah Zarah, the Karban Pesach took on a significance which it hadn't had for centuries. Which is that it was the bittul of Avodah Zarah. Just like that Karban Pesach that was brought in the Midbar and that Karban Pesach of Yoshua. And it was on that day of the Shechita's Karban Pesach that Yoshio told Levine to be going as the Aron. Because now he knew that the Beis HaMikdash, even if it will be destroyed, can't be fully destroyed. There's something which cannot be eradicated. And the Aron is Nignaz. That the Teichen Pnimi, the inner essence, what the Beis Hamikdash is not shaykh to Churban. But that was only a taitzah of the efforts of Yoshiyahu. So therefore, whenever we are makonen over the loss of the Beis Hamikdash, we have to mention Yoshiyahu. And when you think about it for a second, it really is this way. When you lament something, when you mourn something, you say kinas for something, we don't cry over the things we don't have. We cry over the things that we've lost, that we've had and lost, and we cry over the things that we feel we should have, but for some reason don't have. In other words, I did not win the lottery this week. Sorry to tell you. But I didn't shed any tears over not winning this week. Why? Because it's not like I lost $20 million that I already had, and it's not like I had any expectation of getting the $20 million. The odds are too steep. So therefore, there's no point in crying. It would have been nice, but it didn't happen. No, I'm not going to cry over that. The things we cry over are things that we've had and lost, and things that we feel we should have. There's no reason we shouldn't have them, and for some reason we don't have them. Those are the things we cry about. So the truth is, with the passage of time, the idea of crying over the Beis Hamikdash seems to be a very, very odd thing. It's not like we've had it, and it's not like we expect to have it. So why are we still lamenting it? The answer is we do expect to have it, because the truth is it exists. The Beis Hamikdash is here. The Teichen Pnimi, the spiritual aspect of the Beis Hamikdash, even to the extent of Makriv and Alpha Pishain bias, it exists. There is a Beis Hamikdash. The walls are missing. We don't have access, but it's not that it doesn't exist. It's something which is so close and so within our reach that our inability to access it is something which causes tremendous distress. And that's thanks to Yoshiyahu. There's also another thing you have to understand. That the reality of the Beis Hamikdash, that the Aron is nignaz, and this is a consequence of the tshuva that Yoshiyahu was able to accomplish. There's a very close parallel between tshuva and the Beis Hamikdash in this sense. Because what is tshuva? What do you mean a person does tshuva? A person did naver, a person does tshuva. It means because there is something constant in the person, which his averis can't destroy. In other words, whatever a person does, however low a person sinks, there is something internal, there is something in his pnim, deep down, which is not shaykh to churban, which can't be destroyed. And that's why he's able to do tshuva. That's why he's able to change. Because a person would have a very hard time recreating himself. But he can change. Why is it that he can change? You see, if you had to recreate yourself, you'd have a very serious problem. How do you create yourself out of what? If you've destroyed yourself, how do you recreate yourself? But if there is something which is constant, which is that nakuda, that point which is internal, of kedusha, of tara, of perfection, and it's only the externals have become a little bit corrupted, so now it's not a question of reinventing yourself, it's a question of changing yourself. That you can do. Now, the yesod of tshuva is because the teichen pnimi of a human being is constant. The tshuva of Yoshiyahu revealed that that's true for the Beis Hamikdash too. But the Beis Hamikdash is something which is always there, which is not shaykh to churban. That even if the walls of the Beis Hamikdash are destroyed, but the spiritual content of the Beis Hamikdash is intact, and therefore that's the basis of our hope that we can get it back, and that of course is the basis of our lamenting it, because we have this intuitive sense that it's so close, it's readily available. It's just that we just need to do a little bit to get it, and we're not even able to bring ourselves to do that. I just want to share with you something I said in the shir yesterday, not related to anything of the above, but I think it's a very powerful thing, and we'll conclude with this. And the Gemara, the Pasuk says in Yeshaya that the Lasid Lavo, the Umas Ha'olam, the nations of the world, will come to the Beis HaMikdash. The Bayis Shlishim will be rebuilt from here of Yameinu. It says, V'naharu Elo Kol HaGoyim, all the nations will flow to it, and they'll say, L'chu v'nala Beis Hashem Elokei Yaakov. Let us go up to the house of Hashem, the God of Yaakov. And we'll learn from him, and we'll follow in his ways. Ki mitzion teitzei saru dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. So the Gemara Pesachim Peches points out that when it says that the Umas Ha'olam will come to the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash is called Beis Elokei Yaakov, the house of the God of Yaakov. So the question is, why is Yaakov singled out as opposed to Avram and Yitzchak? So the Gemara says that Lo Ka'Avram Shekarai Har, not like Avram who called it a mountain. With regards to Avram, the Makom Mikdash is called a mountain. Bahar Hashem Yira'eh. V'lo ki Yitzchak Shekaro Sadeh, not like Yitzchak with reference to what's called a field. V'yetzi Yitzchak L'suach Basadeh. Rather like Yaakov. Yaakov called it a bias. Ein zeh ki im beis Elokim. So therefore the Umas Ha'olam will come for the aspect which is called bias. So you see that there are three aspects of Beis HaMikdash. There's the aspect that Avram revealed, which is the idea of Har. And there's the aspect which Yitzchak revealed, which is the idea of Sada. And there's the idea that Yaakov revealed called bias. What are these three aspects of Beis HaMikdash? We understand that when you go to the Beis HaMikdash, the first thing you understand is this is a place where you can experience the majesty and the greatness of Rebbeinu Shalom. This is a place where the Shekhinah is present, where the Asari Nisim are present. You feel that you are in the presence of majesty, in the presence of greatness, in the presence of Kedusha. That's the idea of Har. When you stand in front of a lofty mountain, you're overwhelmed, you're taken aback. You're in the presence of greatness. That's the idea of the Beis HaMikdash of Har. Har is the place you go to perceive yourself in the presence of the majesty of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That Avram Avinu revealed. Bahar Hashem Yira'eh. On the mountain, God will be perceived. Bahar Hashem Yira'eh. On the mountain, God will be perceived. The second aspect of Mikdash is that Mikdash is the source of all shefa, all bounty, all bracha that comes to Klal Yisrael, comes from the Makman Mikdash. Yishlach Ezrucha Mikaidesh, Mitzion Yisodeka. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends his help from the Mikdash. But the Mikdash is the source of parnasa, it's the source of bracha for Klal Yisrael. That's what a sod is. A field, it produces bounty. This is where our grain, our fruit, our produce, everything comes from the soda. And that's what Yitzchak revealed. Yitzchak L'suach Basad is noteworthy, of course. Yitzchak is the only one of the Avos who was a farmer, by the way. The others were herders, but Yitzchak bought a field and Gunei Asharim. But Yitzchak L'suach Basad. But there's another aspect, which is that it's a house. A house means it's a place of relationship. It's a place where you feel close, where you feel that with Rebbeinu Shalom we are like a family. There's a care, there's an empathy, there's a concern. That's the idea of bias. It says that Lasid Lava, when the Umas Ha'olam will come, what will be the aspect of the Beis HaMikdash that will attract them? It'll be this aspect of bias. So it's interesting. The Netziv says in the Hamag Dover that there's a reason for this, because he says like this. He says the idea of the Beis HaMikdash as Har comes in the schus of Torah. Now he has a slightly different explanation, but even Lefi Dvarenu, it means because how do you come to perceive the greatness of the Rebbeinu Shalom? Through learning, through Torah. So Umas Ha'olam have no shaychus to that. So the schus for the shefa of Parnasa, the Netziv says, comes in the schus of Korbanos. He brings many rayas to this. And Umas Ha'olam aren't shaykh to avoida either. So he says, but the idea of bias, the idea of being a place of relationship, that's in the schus of Gemilas Chasadim, that even the Umas Ha'olam have a shaykhus to, and therefore they're attracted to the idea of Beis Elokei Yaakov. Al Kapanim, there are three aspects to the Beis HaMikdash. The aspect of Har, the aspect of Sada, and the aspect of bias. So Rav Nachman of Breslov says an amazing thing. In our tefillas, when we daven for the restoration of the Beis HaMikdash, We always say, V'hashev es ha'avoda l'bir veisecha. That Hashem should restore the avodah to the Beis HaMikdash. V'hashev kehanim l'avoidasam. Hashem should restore the kehanim to their avodah. Hashev is Rashi Tevis, Har Sada Bayis. Is Rashi Tevis. When we daven for the restoration of the Beis HaMikdash, it's these three aspects. The aspect of Beis HaMikdash as Har, the aspect of the Beis HaMikdash as Sada, and the aspect of Beis HaMikdash as Bayis. That's V'hashev es ha'avodah. The Bezos Hashem, that the tefillah should be niskayim, V'hashev, Har Sada Bayis, with the binyan by Shlishi B'meher of Yamin.